new ways. Joining us on the line is ethnomusicologist, community musician, music practitioner, I beg your pardon, a cultural researcher and artist herself. Kgalalelo Mofolo is on the line, and through her work in both community and in academia, she's been able to help people shape new ways of how to preserve, how to teach, how to celebrate African musical knowledge without losing the spirit that has been sustained over many centuries. Kgalalelo, a pleasure to speak to you. Welcome to Channel Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I think perhaps a good place to start is to really interrogate for someone who has never, thought about or has misconceptions, perhaps that's a better word, around how we learn musical traditions. What are some of the misconceptions that you'd like to debunk around musical traditions and the knowledge that they carry?
So that's a very good question. Thank you very much. One of the misconceptions that people usually have about these African musical instruments is that they're old and they're ancient in a way that they do not really deserve the kind of effort and the kind of study that Western classical music have. And so another misconception, which is very common, is the fact that people think that these instruments are very easy and one can just pick them up and you don't have to have a technique and you don't have to be a professional or a master, but you just have to pick it up and then just start playing, because by the way some of them look, they just look simple, but they're actually not. So those are some of the misconceptions that we hear a lot.
Right. And when music is able to move from, the village, the family or the community into a university classroom, there's a difference there. What should we never leave behind when we do that?
I think the stories and the people are some of the things that we shouldn't leave behind, because in as much as we live in a very emerging and a modern world, the stories are part of our body archive, the stories and the people who play these instruments. You must also remember that some of these people who used to play these instruments were not documented. Their stories were not documented. The way they played the instruments were not documented. The technique behind it. So I think we cannot leave that behind, because when we leave that behind, then it means that we're going to allow the modern world to change our instruments, because we don't have books surrounding these instruments. We do have, but it's not substantial as you would find a violin book when you get into a class. There's a specific violin book that you have to go through. Otherwise, then you can't learn violin. So I think stories and the people, we cannot leave them behind.
Absolutely. And then when it comes to oral traditions, just to build on what you're saying, Kgalalelo, oral traditions and how they've often relied on memory, and being participatory, and here and there they have written records, but it really is, people play these instruments really for memory. But we are finding ourselves, of course, in a digital era, and there is now a fragility in how we now perceive this information and how we look at it. So, are there ways in which we can digitize but still keep that imaginative way of doing things alive as well?
I think there is. I think there's a lot of partnership that needs to happen. I think sometimes when we preserve, the word preserve sometimes is a bit problematic when people think of creating something new. So I think there's a lot of partnership, and I think we need to start engaging with what is happening in the society or what is happening in the music industry for the musical instruments. And as to information, there's a lot of documentation that needs to happen, and there's a lot of ways we can preserve it with partnering with the digitalization that is happening in our world right now. But we still need to keep the memory, and I understand you spoke about the fragility of everything. I think that is also very much important to take note, because some of them are not very much known. But I think to just sum it up, I think we need to just partner with a lot of digitalization that's happening, and I think that that's just about that.
Absolutely. So important in conversation with Kgalalelo Mofolo. She is such an important woman in ethnomusicology as you and I speak, because her work exists not just in research and in academia, but she's on the ground with communities, helping to shape new ways of how we preserve, how we think, how we teach and celebrate African music. And we're going to continue the conversation after this break.
Rise and Shine with Peter Ndoro and Tsepiso Makwetla.
So how do you respond to Niger's new penal code, which criminalizes same-sex relationships and imposes prison terms of up to 10 years?
Yes, I think the Niger legal system is responding to what is more or less a clarion call to criminalize natural relationships among people of same sex, and is a response to the growing tendency of the West to continue to impose their beliefs and understanding of human rights on the African continent and other developing countries.
That's Dr. Samson Osagi, who's a Nigerian lawyer and former vice president of the African Bar Association. And there are those that are defending it, and many that are saying it's out of order. Where do you sit?
Big continent, bigger conversations. Rise and Shine with Peter Ndoro and Tsepiso Makwetla. 6 till 9 a.m. on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Stay tuned to Channel Africa. Stream us on our new and updated website, channelafrica.co.za. The Journal with Mmatsheko Mosito. Catch it on the Channel Africa app, SABC Plus, and on channelafrica.co.za. Weekdays from 9 till 12 p.m. Central African Time.
21 minutes into 10 a.m. in Central African Time. Thank you very much for staying with us on our Ancestral Science Space. As per tradition, on a Friday, we look at themes of traditional music, instrumentation, and really where we are in the conversations of preserving this music. Because, the low-hanging fruit is what's happening right now. But what about all the wonderful musical traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation that have shaped largely who we are as African people? Kgalalelo Mofolo continues to join me in her capacity as a wonderful ethnomusician. She works in communities. She's a practitioner, and of course is researching this work very deeply so that she can go back into the communities and really share the knowledge in ways that are wholesome but also sustainable going forward. Kgalalelo, let's talk about the times that we're in, right? Because I think you and I would both hate for this music to end up as a museum piece. So how do we navigate the global music trends while still trying to reconnect with our heritage through indigenous instrumentations and indigenous instrumentation, I beg your pardon, and ways of being?
So for me, I always say that these instruments do not just exist on their own. I mean, music is a universal language, and with music, there's no construction of, we can't go there. Music goes beyond the imagination. And I can only imagine that the people who created or started playing these instruments, they just wanted to make music. So I think in the world where we now want to kind of get into the mainstream, I think really what I usually try and do is to play with Western instruments and to create something new. So I think sometimes we are kind of afraid of that because it then will create something new. Some people then would say it's not African music anymore. But then what is African music? I think then we need to start defining, and we need to maybe stop constraining the music and just allow it to partner with other instruments. So I think that is one of the things that I am very, very key on, to just play with other African instruments or play with particularly Western instruments just to create something new. We might not have a name for it yet, but as time goes, historians or researchers like me will call this Ohadi style, or how people come with genres. That's how genres really develop. People don't sit and call their music this, people then will call it later, but the music already exists. So I think if that happens, then we can find a lot of people really just engaging in it, because if it's a performance where there's a violin and a guitar and uhadi or mbira, then people can go to ask, what is that instrument? How does it sound in its original state, quote unquote it? So yes.
Right. I want to talk to you about the work that you do, particularly in how it translates then, because I think what's so amazing and fascinating about the work that you do as an ethnomusicologist is that, excuse me, you pay attention to vocal traditions, but you also a cultural researcher and community music practitioner and a vocalist and an educator, all these wonderful things. So how do you then encompass all of that in being able to transmute that experience back into the community? What is filtering that experience into the collective or the tribe, if we can call it that, look like in practice?
So in practical, really, it just looks like reimagining what we are doing. So most of the time, you would find that in communities, we do not really necessarily come with things that are particularly new. We always come with things that people could relate to first, because as an ethnomusicologist, I'm a critical thinker at heart.
Yeah.
So I need to find critical ways in which the community will relate. So if it's a song that people would usually know or would usually accustomed to, I would try and see if I cannot transcribe that song into Mbira. And then the community kinds of hoovens into the practical part of it. So there's just this whole partnership. I use that word a lot because that's the word that broad defines what I do. And so that's how communities kind of woven into the practical part.
Okay. And any projects that you're currently working on that are community based that you'd like to share in terms of how how the movement of this music is moving out of the university space back into communities?
So yes, I started a concept called Reflection last year. So I had an exhibition where I collected all the different kind of instruments we had that was at my disposal, and then I displayed it to the community. But the title really Reflection it has to do with who are we, where do we come from, and where we are going, which is kind of trying to answer who are we as a people, and going back to find if as a people we can go forward. How do we go forward? But we need to go forward in order to, kind of preserve these. So it's an ongoing project that I'm doing. And the next kind of project that I'm looking into is partnering with cultural practitioners, where I will be combining the different entities and the different tribes. I know that word is a little bit derogatory, but for lack of a better word, the ethnic groups, Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, and, just create something as one, because I see us as one people, and how the music kind of gets into place of telling the story of who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. So that's the ongoing concept that I'm working on, called Reflection.
I like that. I like, and also just that title is uncomplicated and it brings us together,
Yes,
reflections, for us to reflect.
yes,
And why I like it so much and why I'm feeling so deeply resonant with it. I mean, my entire frequency literally just changed as you said that, is because we are
yeah,
in a time of transition right now. There's a lot going
yes,
on. And I think we can agree that music and African music traditions play and continue to play quite a helpful role in making sense of the times right now. So perhaps you can elaborate on that. Music as for collective reckoning, if you will, to
yes,
help us to process our histories, our collective
yes.
grief and trauma, and the
Mhm.
changes that we're currently living through.
Yes. So the questions that are accompanied by the title, who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going? And when people are at the concert, I've had people after the concert ask me, I actually had to ask those questions for myself. And they were not just about culturally, but also where am I going as a person? I will not not know how to move forward if I don't know where I come from. So there's a whole psychological thing that happens that I need to heal from the past in order to go forward. And then music becomes the middleman that kind of helps with that, and knowing our culture and knowing where we come from, because then that's a stand ground. Because if you know who you are, then going forward is something that, happens just systematically, so to say. So these questions are really sort of like, it's like people would go on a therapy session, and because these instruments have the sonic experience, people are then able to sort of like look back, but it's not necessarily just about the instruments, but it's about the person, because my main theme as a person is people, stories, and music. I love people, I love stories, and I love music. So to just combine these and trying to heal people through these concerts and partnership has to be something that I look deep into, because I also had to look deep into myself. I'm sort of, people wouldn't even think I study African music. A lot of people always think I'm into classical music, but when I look at myself, it's because of African music that I found who I am, because I had to look beyond what is selling, but who I am. Who am I as a person? Where am I going? And where do I come from? So that is really such a very important concept for me in a changing world where there's AI or the internet that can tell you who are we as a people, where are we going, and where do we come from. But it's actually a personal journey for each and everyone.
Absolutely. Oh, Kgalalelo,
Yes.
you are the North Star. I think it's so wonderful to see feminines that participate in ethnomusicology in meaningful ways, and I think we need this level of divinity in our communities. And this kind of work, you can research it as much as you can and as you want, but sometimes you're just born with it, and you definitely are born with it. Thank you very much for talking to me and for sharing your knowledge with us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Kgalalelo Mofolo, a South African ethnomusicologist. She's a vocalist. She's a community music leader, practitioner, a cultural researcher. She wears so many hats, but I think her explorations around African indigenous traditions are very important in being able to heal communities as we move forward. 10:31, Fikilele Ngwati standing by with the latest sports.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Let's start off with netball news. Proteas netball